Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Over the last few months, we're getting used to seeing some of the same old tech headlines, and in some cases, the dark side of tech, or the hassle that technology can cause where a project has just not been properly thought out. For example, when I was in San Francisco earlier this year, I came across the infamous shareable scooters, and of course my first impression was, that's pretty cool, until I went for a wander and found these battery-drained scooters of joy abandoned in woods and parks. And then we also have staffing and recruiting problems faced by Lyft, Uber, etc., and the emerging conversation around gig workers' rights. And this got me thinking, are we actually measuring the effect of the emerging gig economy, which obviously I'm a part of, and the impact that's having on the modern workforce? And how do companies find a balance of tech talent across HR departments? Thankfully, today's guest is going to tackle all of my gripes and much, much more, and I'm hoping he's going to be the voice of reason too. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to San Francisco so we can speak with Keith Ryu, founder and CEO of Fountain, a hiring and onboarding platform for hourly workers. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So super glad to be here. So my name is Keith. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Fountain. And Fountain is a hiring automation platform built for the large hourly workforce and the growing on-demand space.
When I was doing my research on you guys, Fountain quickly stood out as a hiring and onboarding platform for hourly workers. But can you just set the scene by offering an overview of exactly what it is and what makes it stand out, or what it does differently to other services out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started the business about 4 years ago. And one of the things that we realized at the time was recruiting for this large hourly workforce had very different challenges than recruiting for your corporate team. So when we say corporate teams, it might include your engineering or product or marketing or sales members. And in the large hourly workforce, these are typically delivery couriers or cashiers, baristas, much more on the service economy level. And the challenges that you typically see when you're recruiting for your core team, it's very much around optimizing for skill sets and talent, and there's a lot of compensation negotiation involved as well. But when it comes to large workforce hiring, so imagine companies like a Deliveroo or Safeway, Cabify. These are some of the customers that we work with. The quality is definitely a huge priority, but what also matters is how do we process this high volume of candidates that are coming in that are slightly unpredictable. There's a lack of online information about this demographic. In fact, 90% of the candidates that we see come in without a resume or a LinkedIn profile, and so that requires companies to screen every single person from scratch. And one of the most surprising things that we realized was how many people that say they'll show up to interviews actually don't end up showing up. There's a staggering 50% no-show-up rate for these interviews. So those are very different challenges of having to process at high volume, high velocity, high turnover, high unpredictability than your typical recruiting process. So what we've built is we've taken a lot of inspiration from the typical marketing automation software, where it's very data-driven, where it's about optimizing for conversion rates and setting up automation workflows, and I've applied that to hiring. So in practice, what we do is we automate the scheduling process for interviews, we automate running background checks, collecting documentation, signing documents, and all the SMS and email reminders that happen in between in order for the employer to kind of push the large candidate pool through the stages of the hiring process.
Now, as this is a tech show, I've got to ask here, in your experience, how are businesses finding that right balance of tech talent across all their HR departments? And are there also any big trends that you're noticing in this space at the moment?
Yeah, so just to clarify, so where we specialize is not necessarily on the kind of tech talent space. Yeah. I do want to kind of set that difference. Kind of the origin behind our company was that we noticed that there were a lot of kind of Silicon Valley companies building solutions for connecting engineers to tech companies, and we felt that there was a lot of focus around that space, but there was this large demographic of kind of this hourly workforce, kind of in the service economy. In fact, at least in the US, 60% of the American workforce, which equates to 77 million people, fall within this hourly workforce. And so it's a vast majority of them. But we felt that it was a demographic that was highly underserved by technology. And so that's really the area that we focus on.
I'm glad you mentioned the Silicon Valley companies there, because I'm also curious if you've ever encountered or heard about the increasing number of staffing and recruiting problems facing companies such as Lyft and Uber, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a space that we're in. I think these are companies that also have very, big challenges around staffing for their corporate workforce. But when it comes to the delivery drivers or the, ride-sharing driving workforce, there's an increasing amount of companies that are growing in this space that are all competing for the same workforce. And so, even from the data that we see today, we work with a large number of these companies. And today we now process close to 1 million applicants per month, of which 90,000 of them get either hired or onboarded or approved to work at these services each month. And so we see a large number of this demographic flowing in. And the problems are typically the demographic is shifting. They want a lot more flexible work environments, kind of a on-demand, plug-in and plug-out type of work experience. And there's an increasing number of companies that are offering those type of opportunities and very quick onboarding cycles. So the companies are left with, even after spending a lot of time onboarding, the workforce, retaining the workforce is another big issue. And, part of retaining the number of workers in the pool is to go out and acquire new drivers, which costs a lot of money and a lot of time. So those are some of the challenges that we're seeing in the space.
And you're so right in what you're saying there, because a lot of people, I would say the majority of people now, are searching for that greater work-life balance and flexibility to have their work around what their own personal lifestyle. So are you also hearing emerging conversations, though, around gig workers' rights? And how do you see those needs forcing the entire industry to evolve?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been a lot of conversations around gig workers' rights. And, it ranges from a wide array of topics, but the area that we focus on is more on like the flexibility and how do we open more opportunities for this workforce. Just as a general trend, we're seeing a very big increase in freelance contract labor with the rise of Upwork and Skype and Slack and Gmail. It's now much easier for a freelance developer or a designer or a marketing consultant to work with multiple companies. And we're seeing the same trend happening in the more physical gig type workforce as well. And in fact, the average worker in this demographic has 2.1 jobs at any given time. And so it's a very different work lifestyle than what we're used to, maybe a decade ago. And, there's a lot of conversation around, how do benefits work here? How do, the typical kind of career trajectory, how do we ensure that someone that's a great driver, at the end of the day, they're not only getting a 5-star rating, but there's some sort of career trajectory and mobility, and that they have education that they're receiving from these work opportunities as well. And so I think it will. These are all conversations that the individual companies need to be a part of, but I think there's a lot of uncertainties, typically, especially country to country. So I think in terms of the industry, we all need to embrace the fact that this is kind of the changing kind of work environment, and we need to there's conversations around potentially even having a separate worker classification that can enable benefits, worker benefits for this demographic.
Now, I recently attended a conference in San Francisco, and when I went out exploring, I was instantly struck by the tragic number of abandoned scooters everywhere. Now, as I know you're in San Francisco, I'm curious, are you noticing any rising issues facing these shareable bikes and scooters like Bird, Line Bike and Spin, etc.?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because we work with a handful of companies in that space. Yeah. And look, any company that's going into uncharted territory is going to experience setbacks. But the good news is that the city governments are now actively working with these new companies with rollout programs. And so there's been some recent progress in San Francisco where the government where the city is granting licenses to certain companies, and so we're seeing kind of this more controlled rollout in San Francisco. But in other areas, other cities across the U.S., there's kind of less of concerns, and even if we go 15 minutes from where we are here, from downtown San Francisco to Oakland, we see a number of these scooters, all being kind of used and rolled out. So it's becoming a very big part of our day-to-day lives. I think the significance here is that this is kind of an early glimpse of what the future workforce might even look like. We're in a space where self-driving cars and potentially delivery drones might come into reality in, let's say, a decade at the very most. And so a big topic is, when self-driving cars come, what happens to the large workforce that's currently, working and, making money through Uber or Lyft or Caviar. And one of the things that's been interesting is when you look at companies like Lime or Spin or Bird, these are companies that don't have drivers because the entire premise of the scooter business is that you can pick up a scooter and you can scoot yourself to down the street. But what many people don't realize is the vast amount of workforce that's required to maintain these services. So every night, these companies like a Lime or Spin or Skip, these are companies that deploy a large workforce to go out and collect the scooters, to maintain them, to charge them, clean them, and every morning they redeploy them back out onto the streets. And so in the future, what this means is when there are self-driving cars too, the type of work, the actual type of work might change. Yes, it's true that there might be less drivers, but there's probably going to be a large number of new roles that are required, like maintenance, or fleet operators for the cars. And so, we think it's very interesting to see this rise of this new workforce that's coming into play in parallel with a lot of these, ride-sharing companies.
It's a great point you made there, because I think all too often, especially in the media, they make a big deal of all the traditional roles that are disappearing, but not enough about the new wave of roles that are coming that are fit for a digital age. Because that's what's happening, isn't it? 10 years ago, there wasn't a social media editor or a social media analyst, but everything changes and evolves, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's unclear, or I can't speak with certainty as to exactly what those roles will look like. But yes, it's very interesting to see these new rules kind of pop up. Like, who would have thought that there would be a large demand for scooter chargers or vehicle kind of maintainers or fleet maintainers just 5 years ago.
Absolutely. And another debate that I keep seeing online from my podcasting base over here in the UK is the ongoing delivery battle between Amazon and the USPS, and even President Trump has been getting involved. I mean, can you offer an overview of this crazy argument and your opinion of this battle between the old analog and in a digital age?
Yeah, so I think what you're referring to is the continued loss or the revenue loss that Postal Service is seeing. And I think recently President Trump came out and kind of pointed the finger at Amazon for the big loss that the Postal Service is seeing. I would say there's too many unknowns there for me to personally give a comment. Amazon has contracted with USPS on this, and I think the concern that President Trump is saying is that with the contracts, USPS is losing a lot of money from all the shipping that Amazon has to do, and Amazon is taking advantage of that. But the details of that contract are unknown from our perspective, and package deliveries are just one segment of USPS's entire operations. We're seeing a very big decline in traditional mail. The quote-unquote advertising mail, otherwise known as just kind of junk mail. We're seeing a very big decrease in that, especially with the rise of electronic advertisement. So I don't necessarily think that it can be completely blamed on Amazon or the traditional kind of delivery companies that are coming out into the market, but that's to the extent of visibility that we have.
So where can we begin to measure the effect of the emerging gig economy in the US workforce, and indeed beyond into the global community?
Yeah, absolutely. So As I mentioned before, 60% of the American workforce falls within this hourly work category, and 40% of the workforce is expected to become independent contractors or freelance workers by 2020, by a recent survey that Intuit conducted. And we're already kind of seeing that trend with our own eyes. Our office is right on Market Street in San Francisco, and when we look out Market Street, it's pretty incredible to see the vast diversification and the amount of different roles that we're seeing. So, we see Uber and Lyft cars driving about. We see Bird and Lime scooters and the workforce that maintains it, bustling about. We see food delivery companies like Grubhub and Caviar and DoorDash and all the couriers, riding around on the bicycles, delivering food, especially during lunchtime. And so we see this big trend, with our own eyes. But behind the scenes too, there's an increase in demand. It's kind of the invisible workforce. Not many people think about the millions of people that work at the Amazon fulfillment centers or the Safeway fulfillment centers that enable one-day shipping or the 2-hour grocery deliveries. Not many people think about the millions of people that come into the offices late at night to clean and maintain the facilities. But that's a very increasing trend. One of the things that we continue to see is the professionalization of, let's say, personal services. And so, as we discussed previously, the type of roles and the type of jobs, that's continuing to change and evolving. But in terms of the emerging gig economy, we get very excited with access to a lot of these on-demand services from a consumer perspective.
So what's next for Fountain, and what role do you see yourself playing in this brave new digital world that we're entering?
Yeah, so today we're very proud of the impact that we're making in this economy. We process 1 million applicants per month. We help companies in the gig economy process almost 1 million applicants per month, of which 90,000 of them each month get approved to work at these services. And so, the amount of impact that we're making is increasing as well. But today we're very much focused on helping the employer side or the B2B companies. But we do see a very big opportunity for us to play a role in helping the end job seeker find new opportunities down the road. So that's an area that our team gets excited about. Our mission is to open opportunities for the global workforce. And so we're making a lot of product efforts to not only help the B2B side, the company or the employer, but also the service provider side down the road.
There's so much going on in this space at the moment, and you mentioned so much there that a lot of people just don't even think about. And I'm sure you've raised a few eyebrows in today's podcast. But before I do let you go, can I just ask that you remind the listeners of where they can find you guys online at Fountain, and also contact a member of your team if they have any questions at all based on our conversation today?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is fountain.com. It's pretty simple, FOUNTAIN.com. And if you have other questions or just want to discuss further, you can actually reach me personally. My email is keith@fountain.com, so KEITH@fountain.com.
Fantastic. There is just so much going on in this space, like I said a few moments ago. And there's a lot of topics that we've covered today and a lot of things I've been able to get off my chest. I found it quite therapeutic. But more than anything, just a big thank you for coming on and sharing your story. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Listening to Keith speak there, it quickly occurred to me that tech is probably guilty of creating just as many problems as it goes out to solve. And as consumers of content, we might be guilty of soaking up the headline and dismissing it, but there are a growing number of real issues that need to be tackled. And there does seem to be a dramatic shift and equally a conflict between the old way and the new way of doing things. But as we all progress through this digital transformation of everything, it's clear that we all need to change, evolve and go with the tide rather than swim against it. So a big thank you for Keith for coming on the show today and eloquently tackling some of the big topics out there. And most importantly, for doing something about these new challenges. But what are your thoughts about everything you've heard today, and indeed any episode that you've heard recently? You can do that by emailing me at techblogwriter@outlook.com or tweet me at Neil C. Hughes. Keep your messages coming in, keep those thoughts coming in. And remember, work hard, stay humble, And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.